"Don't resist tonight, you are mine," Apache giant widow said to virgin rancher. He had grown up in the nearby town, but this land was all his own. It was far from neighbors, far from the noise of the town, and far from anything he knew well. Life here promised freedom, but it also demanded courage. Thomas had spent the morning tending to the fences and checking on his few cattle. The work was hard, but it made him feel alive. Every sound of the wind or rustle of leaves made him alert, reminding him that life in the wilderness was never easy. As he guided his horse toward the cabin, he noticed something unusual near the edge of the trees. A figure stood silently, watching the trail. She was a woman, dressed in simple yet elegant clothing made from the materials of the land. Her dark hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and her eyes were sharp, almost like she could see into Thomas's very thoughts. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the quiet clopping of the horse's hooves against the dry earth. The woman stepped forward slowly. Her movements were calm but deliberate, and there was an air of authority in the way she carried herself. Thomas slowed his horse and watched carefully. He had heard stories about the Apache women who lived in the hills nearby. They were known for their courage, their wisdom, and their fierce independence. Some stories painted them as dangerous, but Thomas had always believed that there was truth and misunderstanding in every tale. Still, seeing her now, he felt a shiver of both curiosity and caution. "Good evening," Thomas called out finally, his voice steady though a little cautious. "You live nearby." The woman's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I live where the land allows me," she said, her voice soft but carrying strength. "And are you new here?" "Yes," Thomas replied. "I just took this homestead a few months ago. It's quiet, maybe too quiet sometimes." He laughed lightly, hoping to ease the tension. She nodded, her eyes scanning the land around them. "The quiet can be a gift and a test. Some men cannot handle it." Thomas felt a strange mix of intrigue and unease. There was something commanding about her presence, something that made him want to speak, but also made him careful with his words. He dismounted his horse, sensing that the meeting could not end with mere greetings. "I'm Thomas," he said, offering his hand. She looked at it, then back at him, and for a moment he thought she might not take it, but finally she did, her grip firm and steady. "I am Ayana," she said. "You will find this land demanding. It does not forgive weakness easily." They walked slowly toward the rancher's cabin, talking about simple things at first: the weather, the trails, and the animals. Thomas tried to learn more about her, but Ayana was careful. She spoke only as much as necessary, giving hints of a life shaped by survival, leadership, and wisdom. Thomas found himself drawn to her strength and the calm certainty in her eyes. He had never met anyone like her before. As night began to fall, Thomas invited Ayana to stay for a meal. He had cooked some beans and bread earlier, and though the meal was simple, the cabin's warmth felt comforting against the cool evening. She accepted, and they sat together quietly, the fire casting shadows on their faces. They ate slowly, sharing stories of the land without revealing too much of their pasts. Thomas found himself listening intently, learning not just from her words but from the way she moved, the way she looked at the world. After the meal, Ayana stood and moved closer to the door, looking out at the horizon. "The night is beautiful," she said softly. "But it can be dangerous too. You must always be ready." Thomas nodded, understanding the warning. The wilderness was unforgiving, and even a simple mistake could lead to disaster. But he also sensed that she was testing him, gauging his character, and perhaps even his courage. He wanted to prove that he was worthy of respect, even if only in her eyes. Suddenly, a sound broke the quiet, a distant howl from the hills, echoing through the night. Thomas tensed, knowing it was probably a coyote or maybe a wolf, but the sound carried a warning nonetheless. Yana's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer to him, and for the first time, Thomas noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor. There was no fear, only alertness and a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her very being. "You see," she said, glancing at him. "The land watches all who enter it. You must watch back." Thomas swallowed, feeling both nervous and strangely exhilarated. He had always thought of himself as brave, but facing the wilderness and meeting someone like Yana made him realize that courage was more than strength. It was awareness, patience, and understanding. The evening passed slowly. They spoke of the stars, the patterns of the wind, and the ways of animals in the hills. Thomas felt his mind opening to new ideas, new ways of seeing the world. He realized that Ayana was not just a woman of the land. She was a teacher in her own right, showing him lessons that no books or town life could ever provide. As the fire burned lower, Thomas sensed it was time for her to leave. He walked her to the edge of the cabin's small clearing. She turned to him one last time, her expression unreadable but her eyes calm and steady. "Remember this, Thomas," she said quietly. "The land tests everyone. It tests patience, courage, and respect. Fail in anyone and it will not forgive." "I understand," Thomas said, meeting her gaze. "I will remember." Yana nodded once and melted into the shadows of the trees. Thomas watched her go, feeling a mix of admiration and wonder. She had appeared as suddenly as she had left, leaving behind a sense of mystery that he could not shake. That night, Thomas lay in his cabin, thinking of the woman who had entered his life so quietly yet left such a strong impression. He felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. He knew that meeting her was only the beginning. The land, the wilderness, and this woman had lessons for him that he had yet to understand, and somehow he felt that his life would never be the same again. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the distant sounds of the hills. The night was dark, full of unseen dangers, but also full of possibility. Thomas closed his eyes, ready for whatever the land, and perhaps Ayana, might bring next. Morning came quietly over the rolling hills, the sun rising slowly and spreading a soft golden light over Thomas's homestead. He woke to the sounds of birds calling and the gentle rustling of the wind through the trees. The night's encounter with Ayana was still fresh in his mind. He could not stop thinking about her, the calm strength in her eyes, the way she moved through the land as if it belonged to her. She had left a mark on him, not just as a mysterious woman, but as someone who seemed to understand the world in ways he could only hope to learn. Thomas went about his morning chores, feeding the animals, checking fences, and tidying up the small cabin. Each task felt heavier than usual because his mind kept wandering back to her. Who was she really? Why had she come to him? And why did he feel so drawn to her presence, even though they had barely spoken? He shook his head, trying to focus on work, but the questions would not leave him. By midday, he decided to explore the area near the trees where he had first seen Ayana. He wanted to understand the land better, and perhaps in some way feel closer to her. The forest was dense in places, with tall pines and thick underbrush. Birds flitted from branch to branch, and small animals scurried through the leaves. Thomas moved carefully, noticing every detail, the shape of the rocks, the direction of the wind, even the way the sunlight filtered through the trees. He realized that living here required more than strength. It required attention, patience, and respect for the land. Suddenly, he noticed signs that someone had passed through recently, footprints in the soft soil, a broken branch, and the faint scent of smoke from a small fire. He smiled to himself, thinking of Ayana. She must have been nearby. Part of him hoped to see her again, but another part warned him to be cautious. This land was hers as much as it was his, and he had no right to intrude carelessly. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Thomas returned to the cabin. He began repairing a section of the fence that had weakened over the winter. Hammering the posts into place, he thought again of the lessons Ayana had subtly shared the night before. The land tests everyone. It tests patience, courage, and respect, she had said. He realized she was right. Every task here was a test, every choice mattered. He had to prove to himself that he could live in this wilderness, not just survive, but thrive. While working, he heard movement near the edge of the clearing. He stopped and listened carefully. A figure stepped into view. Yana. She had returned, moving quietly and confidently, as though she belonged to the forest itself. Thomas felt a mixture of surprise and relief. He had not expected her to come back so soon, yet seeing her again brought a strange sense of comfort. "You are persistent," he said, smiling as she approached. She returned the smile, but it was subtle, almost teasing. "I came to see if the land had tested you well," she said. Her voice was calm, but Thomas noticed a spark of amusement in her eyes. He put down his tools and wiped his hands on a cloth. "I think I'm learning," he replied, "but I still have a long way to go." They walked together through the clearing, speaking quietly. Thomas asked about her life, her family, and her experiences in the hills. Yana spoke carefully, sharing stories of the land, her people, and the challenges she had faced. She told him about winters when food was scarce, summers when water was even scarcer, and times when outsiders had caused trouble for her community. Her words were measured, full of wisdom, and Thomas found himself listening intently, absorbing every detail. As they spoke, Thomas realized that Ayana was not only strong but also incredibly intelligent. She understood the land, its animals, and its people in ways he could never have imagined. He felt a deep respect for her, a respect that went beyond curiosity or attraction. She had survived hardships he could not imagine, and yet she moved through life with grace and courage. Later in the afternoon, they came across a small stream that ran through the forest. The water was clear and cold, and Thomas knelt to take a drink. Ayana followed, her movements smooth and precise. She taught him how to check the water's safety and how to notice subtle changes in the landscape that indicated danger. Thomas listened carefully, realizing that every lesson she gave was not just about survival. It was about understanding the balance of life in the wilderness. As evening approached, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. Thomas felt a sense of unease. He had been in storms before, but there was something different about this one. It was stronger, wilder, and it reminded him of the unpredictability of the land he now called home. Yana noticed his tension and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "The land tests more than patience," she said quietly. "It tests courage and wisdom too. Sometimes the storms come unexpectedly, and we must be ready to face them." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that living here required not just physical strength, but emotional strength as well. He had to trust his instincts, respect the land, and learn from those who had lived here longer and wiser. The first drops of rain began to fall, and they hurried back to the cabin. The storm arrived quickly, with strong winds that rattled the wooden walls and heavy rain that turned the dirt paths into slippery mud. Thomas worked alongside Ayana to secure the cabin and protect the animals. The experience was intense, but it also brought them closer together. They spoke little, but their teamwork and shared focus created a bond that words could not capture. After the storm passed, the air smelled fresh and clean, and the sky cleared to reveal a brilliant sunset. Thomas and Ayana stepped outside, tired but satisfied. They looked out over the land, now sparkling with raindrops, and felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. "You are learning quickly," Ayana said, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. "But remember, every day here is a new test. Do not let pride blind you to the lessons of the land." Thomas smiled, feeling both humbled and inspired. "I will remember," he said, "and I hope you will continue to teach me." Ayana nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Perhaps I will, but you must show that you are ready not just for me but for the land itself." That night, as Thomas lay in his cabin, he reflected on the day. He had faced challenges he had never imagined, learned lessons that went beyond physical work, and seen a side of life that was both beautiful and harsh. The land had tested him, and he had learned to respect it, to listen to it, and to understand its rhythms. He thought again of Ayana, wondering what other lessons she might hold, and how much he could learn from her presence. She was more than a mysterious visitor. She was a guide, a teacher, and a symbol of the strength and wisdom required to live in this rugged land. Thomas felt a sense of anticipation for what the future might bring, knowing that every day would offer new challenges, new lessons, and perhaps new moments of connection with someone who had already changed his life. Outside, the forest was quiet, the night filled with the sounds of nocturnal animals and the gentle whisper of the wind. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling a mix of exhaustion and excitement. The wilderness was demanding, but it was also full of opportunity. And with Ayana's guidance, he felt that he could face whatever tests came next. The night passed peacefully, but Thomas knew that life in the hills would never be simple. Every day brought new trials, new discoveries, and new moments that tested his courage and resolve. Yet he felt ready more than ever to embrace the challenges ahead. The land, the storms, and the people who called it home would teach him lessons he could not find anywhere else. And in the quiet moments, he would remember the woman who had entered his life, showing him the power of respect, patience, and understanding. The morning air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine from the rainstorm of the previous evening. Thomas awoke early, feeling both rested and restless. Something in the quiet of the hills called to him, a sense that the land was not just a backdrop for his life, but a presence that demanded attention and respect. He dressed quickly and stepped outside, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sun had not fully risen, but the first rays of light stretched across the hills, making the dew sparkle like tiny diamonds. Yana was already there, standing near the edge of the clearing, her gaze focused on the forest beyond. She moved with calm purpose, inspecting the ground, the trees, and the small streams that ran through the land. Thomas approached her, careful not to startle her. "Good morning," he said softly. She turned, her face lighting up with a small smile. "Morning," she replied. "The land is restless today. Can you feel it?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I think I do. Something feels different." Yana's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes. There are signs, subtle ones, that trouble may come. You must be alert, Thomas. The hills are rarely silent for long." He followed her as she walked deeper into the forest, teaching him how to read the subtle signs that something was amiss. A snapped twig, a displaced rock, and even the unusual silence of birds could all signal danger. Thomas listened carefully, realizing that Ayana's wisdom was not just about survival. It was about understanding the land as a living, breathing entity. As they moved through a narrow trail, Thomas suddenly noticed something unusual. The tracks of several men were imprinted in the soft soil, leading toward his homestead. They were not the usual wanderers or hunters. These tracks were larger, heavier, and purposeful. Thomas felt a surge of concern. "Yana, these tracks, they're heading this way." She studied them calmly, her eyes sharp. "Yes, outsiders," she said. "They may mean no harm, or they may. We must prepare." Thomas felt a mix of fear and determination. He had worked hard to build his life here, and he was not about to let strangers endanger it. "What should we do?" he asked. Yana pointed toward the cabin. "We fortify what we can, protect the animals, prepare for any surprises, and stay close. The land tests those who are unprepared." They hurried back to the cabin. Thomas quickly secured the fences, moved the animals to safer areas, and gathered supplies in case the outsiders were not friendly. Yana helped him, her movements efficient and confident. Together, they worked as a team, their trust and understanding growing with every passing moment. Thomas realized that her presence made him stronger, more aware, and more capable than he had ever been alone. By midday, the outsiders appeared. 3 men approached cautiously, their eyes wary and curious. Thomas stood at the edge of the clearing, facing them with his heart pounding but his stance firm. Ayanna remained close, her presence both reassuring and commanding. "Who are you?" Thomas called out. "And what do you want here?" The tallest man stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "We mean no harm," he said. "We are travelers looking for shelter. The storm last night made the trails dangerous." Thomas studied them carefully. He sensed honesty in their voices, but he also knew that appearances could be deceiving. Ayanna's eyes met his, and without words he understood her silent advice: trust but remain cautious. "Very well," he said finally. "You may stay, but you follow our rules. The animals, the cabin, and the land are not to be disturbed." The men nodded, relief showing in their expressions. They followed Thomas and Ayanna to the cabin, helping with small chores and setting up a temporary shelter nearby. As they worked, Thomas observed them closely, learning more about their intentions through their actions rather than their words. Evening arrived, and Thomas felt a sense of exhaustion mixed with pride. The day had tested his patience, his courage, and his ability to judge character. He realized that Ayanna had been right. The land did test everyone, but it also offered lessons for those willing to learn. As the fire crackled in the cabin, Thomas and Ayanna sat quietly, watching the newcomers. "You handled today well," Ayanna said softly. "But remember, courage is not just facing danger. It is knowing when to act and when to observe. You must balance strength with wisdom." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had learned much in just a few days, but he knew there was still more to understand. The land, the people, and the challenges that came with both demanded continuous learning and constant awareness. That night, as the newcomers slept, Thomas and Ayanna ventured out to check the boundaries of the property. The stars shone brightly overhead, casting a gentle light over the hills and trees. Thomas felt a deep sense of connection to the land and to the woman who had guided him through its tests. "You have grown stronger today," Ayanna said quietly, "but strength alone is not enough. Trust is also required, trust in yourself, in the land, and in those who prove themselves worthy." Thomas looked at her, feeling a mix of admiration and gratitude. "I understand," he said, "and I trust your guidance." Ayanna smiled faintly, a rare softness in her expression. "Good. Remember, Thomas, the land is patient but unforgiving. Respect it and it will protect you. Ignore it and it will challenge you in ways you cannot imagine." The next morning they awoke to the sound of distant horns. A group of travelers had arrived, seemingly unaware of the newcomers who were already staying at the cabin. Thomas felt a knot of tension in his stomach. The land was testing him again, this time in ways he could not fully predict. Ayanna moved beside him, calm and observant. "We must approach carefully," she said. "Observe first, act second. Haste leads to mistakes." Together they watched the new arrivals, noting their behavior, their movements, and their intentions. Thomas realized that survival was not just about strength or courage. It was about patience, observation, and understanding. He had learned much from Ayanna, and now he had the opportunity to apply those lessons in real situations. Hours passed, and Thomas felt a growing sense of confidence. He was no longer the inexperienced rancher who had arrived weeks before. He had faced storms, strangers, and uncertainty, and he had learned to navigate them with wisdom and courage. By evening, the new travelers had moved on, leaving Thomas and Ayanna in peace once again. Thomas felt a deep sense of relief, but also pride. He had proven to himself that he could handle challenges, respect the land, and make careful decisions. Ayanna's presence had been crucial, but he also realized that he was growing into someone capable of handling the wilderness on his own. As the fire burned low that night, Thomas and Ayanna sat together, reflecting on the events of the day. "You are learning quickly," she said. "But remember, the land's tests are never truly over. Every day will bring new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to grow." Thomas nodded, feeling both humbled and inspired. "I will remember," he said, "and I will be ready for whatever comes next." Yana placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Good. Courage is not just facing danger, it is learning, growing, and respecting the land and those who inhabit it. Thomas felt a sense of calm and determination. He had faced one test and learned valuable lessons, but he knew there were more challenges ahead. The land was alive, full of surprises, and Ayanna had shown him that understanding, patience, and respect were the keys to surviving and thriving in this wilderness. As the night deepened, Thomas lay in his cabin, thinking about the lessons he had learned, the storms he had weathered, and the people he had encountered. He felt a growing sense of confidence, tempered by humility and a deep respect for the land and the woman who had guided him. Outside, the forest was quiet, the stars bright in the sky, and the wind gentle. Thomas knew that life in the hills would never be easy, but he felt ready for the challenges ahead. With Ayanna's guidance, his courage, and his respect for the land, he believed he could face anything that came his way. The night passed peacefully, but Thomas understood that each day in the wilderness would bring new tests. He had survived storms, faced strangers, and learned lessons that went beyond physical strength. He was growing, learning, and becoming the person he needed to be to live in this land. And somewhere deep in the hills, Ayanna watched the land with quiet pride, knowing that the young rancher was learning the ways of the wilderness, not just through trial, but through respect, courage, and understanding. The morning sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. Thomas woke early, as usual, listening to the sounds of the forest. Birds chirped, the wind rustled the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a stream whispered over rocks. The peacefulness of the morning was a sharp contrast to the unease Thomas felt. Something in the air told him that today would be different, that the land was preparing a test far more serious than the ones before. Yana was already outside, walking through the clearing with calm determination. Her eyes scanned the horizon, noting subtle changes in the landscape, the tilt of the branches, the patterns in the soil, even the flight of birds. Thomas approached her quietly. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound steady, though he could feel tension in his chest. "Morning," she replied without turning. "The land speaks, Thomas. Do you hear it?" Thomas shook his head. "I feel it, but I don't understand what it's telling me." Yana's sharp eyes met his. "Today, the land will teach you more than observation. You will learn courage, trust, and quick thinking. A true test is coming." Before Thomas could respond, a cloud of dust rose in the distance. 3 riders approached at a steady pace. Their horses kicked up earth, and their presence carried a sense of urgency. Thomas tensed, instinctively moving closer to Ayanna. "They are not friendly," she said softly. "See the way they ride, purposeful, unyielding. Prepare yourself." Thomas felt his heart pound. He quickly ran to secure the animals and double-check the cabin. Yana moved with him, her presence calm but commanding. Together, they reinforced the fences, stacked firewood in strategic places, and prepared for any possible encounter. Thomas realized that today, the lessons he had learned were not just about survival. They were about action, decision-making, and courage under pressure. The riders arrived at the edge of the clearing, dismounting quickly. One of them, a tall man with a weathered face, stepped forward. "We are looking for provisions," he said in a rough voice. "We mean no harm if you cooperate." Thomas glanced at Ayanna. Her eyes were narrowed, assessing the strangers. She spoke softly to him, "Judge carefully. Appear calm but stand your ground. Strength is not just force, it is resolve." Taking a deep breath, Thomas stepped forward. "You may take what you need, but you do not threaten the land or its animals. Follow the rules or you will face the consequences." The strangers exchanged glances and the tension thickened. One of them reached for a bag, but Thomas stepped closer, firm and unafraid. "Stop," he said, his voice steady. "Respect this land or leave it." Yana moved beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Stand strong, Thomas. Courage does not waver in the face of fear." For a moment the 3 men seemed to hesitate. Then the tall man spoke again, his tone softer. "We will follow your rules. We mean no harm." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then you may proceed carefully. Take only what is necessary and disturb nothing else." The men moved to gather some supplies, but their movements were cautious, aware of the vigilance of both Thomas and Ayanna. The tension did not leave the clearing, but slowly it eased as the outsiders respected the rules set before them. Thomas realized that his courage, coupled with Ayanna's guidance, had kept the situation under control. Once the men departed, Thomas exhaled deeply. "That was intense," he said, his voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. Ayanna's eyes softened slightly. "Indeed, but you handled it well. You followed the lessons the land has taught you: observation, patience, and courage. You acted wisely and you stood your ground." Thomas felt a sense of pride, tempered by humility. He had faced a true test and realized that his growth was more than physical. It was mental and emotional. The land, with all its challenges, had become a teacher, and Ayanna had been the guide he needed. As the day progressed, the pair inspected the land further, checking the fences, the water sources, and the paths around the homestead. Ayanna taught Thomas how to notice changes that could signal danger, how to anticipate challenges before they arrived, and how to remain calm even in tense moments. Thomas listened carefully, absorbing every detail. By late afternoon, they heard a distant sound, a low rumble that seemed to grow steadily louder. Clouds gathered quickly overhead, dark and heavy. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, smoke. Thomas felt a wave of apprehension. Ayanna noticed his tension and placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Another test," she said. "The land challenges those who are not prepared. We must move quickly." They hurried toward the source of the smoke and discovered that part of the forest had caught fire. A small blaze was spreading, likely from a lightning strike during the earlier storm. Thomas felt a surge of fear. A fire could destroy everything he had worked for. Ayanna acted quickly, her mind calm and decisive. "We must create a fire break," she said. "Move rocks, clear brush, and protect the animals. Follow my lead, Thomas." Together, they worked tirelessly. Thomas used every ounce of strength and knowledge he had gained over the past weeks, while Ayanna guided him with precision and clarity. The heat of the fire, the thick smoke, and the urgency of the moment tested him like never before. He felt exhaustion creeping in, but he pushed through, knowing that survival depended on their determination and teamwork. Hours passed, and the fire slowly came under control. The blaze was not entirely extinguished, but it had been contained and the homestead was safe. Thomas collapsed on the ground, panting and covered in soot. Ayanna knelt beside him, her face calm but weary. "You did well," she said softly. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action despite fear. Today, you proved that you are capable of facing the land's challenges." Thomas nodded, feeling both relief and pride. He had faced the test of strangers and the test of fire, and he had survived with wisdom, patience, and courage. Ayanna's guidance had been crucial, but he also realized that he had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable than he had been before. As evening fell, the sky cleared, revealing a brilliant display of stars. Thomas and Ayanna stood together, surveying the land. The smoke had lifted, the animals were safe, and the homestead had endured. The challenges of the day had forged a bond between them, a trust and respect that went beyond words. "Today was a true test," Thomas said quietly. "I have learned so much." Ayanna smiled faintly. "And there is still much to learn. The land will continue to teach, but you have shown that you are ready to listen, to act wisely, and to face challenges with courage." Thomas felt a deep sense of connection to the land, to the woman who guided him, and to the life he was building. The trials of the day had tested his resolve, but they had also strengthened his spirit. He understood that true courage came not just from facing danger, but from respecting the land, learning its lessons, and trusting in oneself and others. As night fell, they returned to the cabin. The fire inside crackled warmly, offering comfort after a long, exhausting day. Thomas sat quietly, reflecting on the lessons he had learned, the challenges he had faced, and the growth he had achieved. He felt a sense of gratitude for the land, for the guidance of Ayana, and for the opportunity to prove himself in the face of real challenges. Outside, the forest was calm once again. The stars shone brightly, and the wind whispered softly through the trees. Thomas understood that life in the hills would never be simple, but he felt ready for whatever came next. With Ayana's guidance, his courage, and his respect for the land, he knew he could face any challenge that arrived. Ayana watched him quietly, her eyes reflecting pride and quiet satisfaction. "You are learning well," she said softly. "Remember, the land's tests are endless, but so are its lessons. Continue to observe, to act wisely, and to trust yourself." Thomas nodded, feeling a deep sense of determination. He had survived storms, faced strangers, and confronted fire. He had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident. The land had tested him, and he had met those tests with courage, patience, and respect. And as he lay down to rest that night, Thomas knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to grow. The wilderness was alive, full of surprises, and he was ready to meet them all, with Ayana's guidance and his own hard-earned courage. The morning sun rose over the hills, casting a warm, golden light across Thomas's homestead. The air was fresh and calm, carrying the scent of pine and earth after the storms and trials of the past days. Thomas woke early, as usual, feeling both rested and thoughtful. The events of the previous days, the encounters with outsiders, the storms, and the fire, had tested him in ways he had never imagined. But they had also taught him courage, patience, and the importance of understanding the land and the people around him. Ayana was already outside, moving gracefully through the clearing. Her eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the small details of the forest, the hills, and the cabin. Thomas approached her quietly, carrying a sense of calm confidence he had not felt before. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, her voice steady and warm. "Today the land is calm, but that does not mean there are no lessons to learn. Even in peace there is understanding to gain." Thomas nodded, understanding her meaning. The past few days had been full of challenges, but now there was a chance to reflect and absorb what he had learned. "I feel like I've grown," he said quietly. "I understand the land more and I feel stronger." Ayana smiled faintly. Strength comes not only from action but from reflection. Courage, patience, and wisdom are all connected. You have learned well, but the lessons of the land are endless. Together, they walked through the clearing and along the small trails that wound through the hills. Thomas noticed how much he had changed, the way he observed the wind, the trees, and even the subtle movements of animals. He was no longer simply surviving. He was learning to live in harmony with the land. As they walked, they spoke quietly about the events of the past days. Thomas shared his feelings about the strangers who had come to the homestead, the fire that had tested their courage, and the storms that had reminded him of the land's power. Ayana listened attentively, offering guidance and insight. "You faced fear and uncertainty," she said softly. "You made decisions under pressure and you protected both yourself and the land. These are not small accomplishments. You have shown wisdom and courage, and you continue to grow." Thomas felt a deep sense of pride, tempered by humility. He realized that the land had been his teacher, Ayana had been his guide, and the challenges he had faced had been opportunities to become stronger and wiser. He also understood that trust in oneself, in others, and in the land, was as important as any physical skill. By midday, they returned to the cabin where the animals were safe, the fences secure, and the homestead in order. Thomas worked alongside Ayana, performing routine chores with a calm confidence that reflected the growth he had experienced. The two moved in harmony, their actions synchronized without words, each understanding the other's intentions. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Ayanna suggested they visit the nearby stream. The water was clear and sparkling, reflecting the sky above. Thomas knelt beside it, cupping the cool water in his hands. Ayanna joined him, and they both gazed at the flowing stream in quiet contemplation. "The land has tested you, Thomas," she said softly. "You have faced storms, fire, strangers, and uncertainty. Through it all, you have remained patient, courageous, and wise. Today you can see the results, not in trophies but in understanding and harmony." Thomas nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He had learned much about survival, courage, and respect for the land, but he had also learned about himself, his strengths, his fears, and his capacity to grow. As evening approached, they returned to the cabin. Thomas prepared a simple meal, and they sat together, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the quiet comfort of the homestead. The past days had been challenging, but now there was peace, a moment to appreciate the lessons learned and the trust built between them. "You have changed, Thomas," Ayanna said quietly, her eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. "Not only in skill but in heart. You respect the land, the animals, and the people. You act with courage, patience, and understanding. That is true growth." Thomas felt a deep sense of gratitude. "I could not have done it without you," he said. "Your guidance, your wisdom, it has made all the difference." Ayanna shook her head slightly, a faint smile on her lips. "I did not do it for you alone. I do it for the land, for those who respect it, and for those willing to learn. You have earned it by your actions, your patience, and your courage." Night fell slowly, and the stars emerged one by one, twinkling above the hills. The wind was gentle, carrying the sounds of nocturnal animals and the whisper of trees. Thomas sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, from a young, inexperienced rancher to someone capable of understanding and respecting the wilderness. He realized that the true reward was not just survival or safety, but the knowledge, confidence, and connection he had gained. He had faced challenges, made decisions under pressure, and learned to trust both himself and Ayanna. The lessons of the land were endless, but he was no longer afraid. He had grown into someone who could face whatever tests came next. Ayanna stood beside him, looking at the stars. "Tomorrow will bring new lessons, Thomas," she said softly. "The land is patient, but it always teaches. You must continue to observe, to act wisely, and to trust yourself." Thomas nodded. "I understand, and I will. I feel ready for whatever comes next." They stayed outside for a while, watching the night sky and listening to the quiet rhythm of the wilderness. Thomas felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had survived the storms, the strangers, and the fire. He had learned patience, courage, and respect. Most importantly, he had learned the value of guidance, trust, and understanding. As the night deepened, they returned to the cabin. Thomas lay down to rest, feeling a calm confidence he had never known before. The land was alive, full of challenges and lessons, but he felt ready to face them all. With Ayanna's guidance and the wisdom he had gained, he knew he could meet any obstacle with courage, patience, and respect. The next morning, Thomas awoke to the soft glow of sunrise. He rose quietly, taking a moment to observe the land, the animals, and the cabin. Everything was calm, yet he knew that life in the wilderness would always bring tests and opportunities for growth. Ayanna approached him, her eyes bright with calm strength. "Are you ready, Thomas?" she asked. He smiled, feeling the confidence and wisdom he had gained over the past days. "I am ready," he said. Together they walked through the hills, observing the land, the animals, and the patterns of nature. Thomas moved with awareness, understanding, and respect. He noticed subtle signs that he had missed before, predicted changes in the weather, and acted with confidence and care. The day passed peacefully, but Thomas knew that life in the wilderness would never be simple. It would always demand patience, courage, and wisdom. Yet he felt ready for every challenge, every lesson, and every moment of growth. By evening, they returned to the cabin. Thomas felt a deep sense of accomplishment, pride, and gratitude. He had faced danger, learned lessons, and grown stronger. He had discovered the importance of respect, patience, courage, and trust. He had also formed a bond with Ayanna, a bond built on understanding, guidance, and shared experiences. As night fell, Thomas and Ayanna sat quietly, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of the forest. The journey had tested them, challenged them, and taught them more than they could have imagined. But it had also brought peace, understanding, and growth. Thomas realized that the true value of life in the wilderness was not just survival, but learning, growing, and connecting with the land, with others, and with oneself. The tests of the land would continue, but he was no longer afraid. He had learned the lessons, gained the wisdom, and discovered the courage to face whatever came next. Ayanna smiled, seeing the calm strength in his eyes. "You have learned well, Thomas. The land will continue to teach, but you are ready. You have respect, courage, and understanding. That is the greatest achievement." Thomas nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had grown, learned, and survived. He had formed a bond with Ayanna, discovered the power of patience and trust, and understood the true lessons of the land. And as he lay down to rest that night, Thomas knew that he was ready for whatever the future held. The land would continue to challenge him, teach him, and guide him, but he was no longer inexperienced or fearful. He was strong, wise, and ready. The stars shone above, the wind whispered through the trees, and the wilderness stretched endlessly around them. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling peace, strength, and readiness for the life he had chosen. A life of courage, respect, and understanding, guided by the lessons of the land and the wisdom of Ayanna.